Renegades has finally been revealed. Bungie hosted an hour-long live stream, starting off with an entire Vidoc showcasing their second expansion for the year, Renegades. Now, the rest of the stream, they talked about Renegades more in detail, and that's really the focus of today's video. However, we're going to be breaking down everything we saw in that stream. Now, for those that are not familiar with the rollout of expansions, instead of Bungie doing one big annual expansion, they've now started to do two. Not as big as, say, something like Final Shape or Witch Queen, and I think a lot of comparisons have been made to like the size of something like Shadowkeep. Now, the first expansion this year was Edge of Fate, which had us going to Kepler, and it essentially is the story that kicked off the 9 saga. Renegades continues that story, and this expansion will be launching on December the 2nd, and it will be taking place on the Lawless Frontier. The Vanguard, who's too preoccupied with other obligations, has allowed a criminal underworld to fester unchecked that may in fact pose a greater threat than they realize. Now, after our excursion on Kepler, Drifter, aka Germain, has been digging into the connection between the 9 and a new faction of Cabal called the Barrent Imperium. Now, during his investigation, the Drifter is captured, and to save him, we must first infiltrate this criminal underworld and get our hands dirty to gain enough notoriety to challenge the Imperium. Now, if it wasn't obvious already, guys, this entire expansion is very much Star Wars themed. Now, that doesn't mean Emperor Palpatine has somehow returned or is going to end up in this universe, but everything from locations to weapons to characters and even the plots all take heavy inspiration from the Star Wars universe. We've got ATSTs, blasters, a Sarlacc pit, lightsabers. So if you're a fan of Star Wars, chances are you're going to love this expansion. Personally, I'm not that crazy about Star Wars myself. Yes, I grew up with it, but I'm not like a mega fan. But I'm actually seeing the vision here for Renegades. And who knows, maybe I might actually watch some of the new Star Wars shows after playing Renegades. I know many of you have been telling me in the stream constantly to watch, I think, what is it, Acolyte or something? We'll get around to it, fellas, I promise. Now, this takes us to that criminal underworld. You see, the central hub of this criminal underworld is located on Mars, in what is now called Tharsis Outpost. Now, the seasoned veterans among you may recognize this location by its previous name, Tharsis Junction, which was a location on Mars inside of Destiny 1. Now, we get a good look inside this outpost from the Vidoc. There's a bar encircling a giant servitor, tables of criminals playing cards, and even Spider has his own pad here. Now, there's 3 different syndicates that operate on the frontier, which takes us to our first one, the Pikers, a band of atheist Elixni who follow relics, which is odd because we killed him in Season of the Seraph. I swear, no one dies in this damn game. Then we have Tharsis Reformation. This is a faction of Vex who gained independence after escaping Maya's control. And get this, they wear clothes, they play cards, and they even commit crimes. These Vex, they want to be people. Hell, this Minotaur we saw in the Vidoc is even holding Fatebringer. Part of me just feels like these Vex were watching us get all this loot, and they were just like, you know what? I want that stuff too. And then we have the Totality Division. This is a subset of the Barrent Imperium, led by the Scion Enforcer, Rao. Not gonna lie, this guy's got aura, man. Now, it's unclear exactly how we're gonna be interacting with each syndicate through the expansion, but it sounds like instead of XP, we're gonna be leveling up what Bungie has dubbed our notoriety with each of these syndicates by completing jobs out on the frontier. And completing jobs will raise our notoriety, allowing us to take on harder jobs, culminating into the Day 1 dungeon. Now, the sneak peek we received looks like it's a darkness structure similar to the Sunder Doctrine location on Venus. The outside is covered in scaffolding, which may have some intriguing lore implications depending on who left it there. Perhaps it was some raiders, maybe it was the Vanguard. We'll have to wait and see. Now, DMG has further clarified this on Twitter, saying that the dungeon is planned for the second week of Renegades. Now, whether that's going to time gate the narrative remains to be seen. I will say Edge of Fate's story did play out in full before we went into the Day 1 raid, but Renegades, of course, is a completely different experimental format. And like previous dungeons, there will be a contest version of it, and I'm sure it's going to launch on Saturday. And it's actually surprising to me to see how much time they're giving us in regards to preparation for a dungeon. Normally, raids require more, but honestly, I'm okay with this. It gives us a bit more time to just tackle the content itself before having to take on contests. Now, back to the Lawless Frontier. In the Lawless Frontier, we'll be completing jobs on 3 revamped destinations: Europa, Venus, and Mars. Now, each of these pull design inspiration from Star Wars, such as Hoth, Dagobah, and Tatooine. Now, these destinations will be accessed from the Lawless Frontier holomap. We'll have the choice between 3 types of jobs: bounty hunt, sabotage, and smuggle. Now, based on the footage that we were shown, the enemy type that we're going to be fighting against should be chosen by the syndicate that we're working for. These can be match-made, they can be played solo, or with your own crew of 3. Now, each map has multiple starting locations missions, objectives, and times of day, which I really like. This adds variety to the activities. Now, upon entering the frontier, the gameplay loop is pretty simple. You drop into the activity, you complete your objective, you collect your riches along the way, you exfil without dying, while swarms of ads are trying to take you down. Yes, it looks like swarms of ads. Bungie's picking up the ad density here. What Bungie has essentially done here is created an extraction mode inside of Destiny. Matter of fact, as you're listening to this, you can tell there is a ton of inspiration from games like Helldivers that Bungie is pulling from. And we may be in a situation where if your entire team gets wiped and you get kicked to orbit, even if you had a tier 5 piece that you picked up while inside of the frontier, you may not even have it if you don't successfully extract. Now, finding loot out on the frontier was never really talked about, but creative lead Tom Farnsworth said that while we are completing our main objective, we would have multiple curveballs thrown our way. Missile towers that would attack us from across the map. You could divert to deal with these side objectives, which will allow players to earn extra credits, which sounds like currency tied directly into Renegades. And my hope is that we do actually find more than just currency out on the frontier. Now, after you complete the campaign, you'll unlock something called Invasion. Now, this is where we get a mix of gambits in the open frontier. Similar to gambits, you can now enter a portal, and you have the opportunity to blow up another team's mission. Now, it's completely opt-in for both the attacking and the defending Guardians, but Bungie did state that there is a potential of earning higher rewards if you handle the threat successfully. Now, the invader will have a certain amount of freedom to choose when they invade, and when they do, they'll have access to a new suite of abilities arriving in Renegades. Now, this is kind of wild, guys, because yes, we do have Gambit, but it's like this fast dash to the finish line with two teams facing off 4v4 on a very static map. Personally, the best version of Gambit comes from Destiny Rising. No lie, Destiny Rising has their own version of Gambit, and it is really good. It's 6 teams of 3, all facing off against each other. It's chaotic, it's fun, and dare I say, semi-competitive. Now, these mix of invasions inside of the frontier here is really interesting because it's one thing to be focused on this group of ads in front of you, to then suddenly get dunked on from behind from some rogue Guardian. I know some of my PvE players hate the sound of this, and again, this is completely opt-in, but I guess considering we're literally going to be playing as criminals and working with these different criminal factions, I like it. It's right up my alley, man. Nothing would please me more than to wipe a team and then take all their stuff. But Bungie's gonna have to make it substantially more rewarding for players to take on that risk. But this takes us to those abilities. The reason why I said this is like a mix of Helldivers and Destiny is because we're getting abilities, and these are not just abilities for the invaders, it's for everyone. Over the course of the campaign and deep into the post-game of Renegades, everyone will be able to unlock and upgrade 9 different abilities. These are divided into 3 categories: offensive, defensive supports, and vehicles. Each ability will have 7 upgrades that you can also unlock over time. Now, based off of the Vidocs UI, my guess is that the first 3 upgrades can all be active at once, but you have to choose which one of the remaining 4 to 7 bonuses that you want to use. Now, we weren't shown every ability, but here's the ones we know of so far. Cabal drop pods. Yes, you can summon your own drop pod on top of enemies. And if you think that doesn't sound powerful, keep in mind the one thing that has been able to kill us from every expansion since the beginning of time has been Cabal drop pods. Airstrikes. You could call down a barrage of missiles to blanket an area. Turrets. We could drop our own turrets down that would shoot missiles at combatants. You could spawn in a Cabal walker. Essentially, you flip out a coin to summon a Cabal walker that looks very similar to bricks. You could summon a swoop bike, which essentially is our Griffin. It's our Sparrow with guns. Now, we were also told that the Interceptor would be another vehicle that we can summon, but there are only 2 vehicle abilities. One of them is the swoop bike that we just discussed, so it is possible that this is bundled in as an upgrade with another one of the abilities. Now, we do get to see one of these upgrades in action. The Cabal walker releases these arc projectiles that float into the air and then split into smaller projectiles and track enemies. And Robbie even mentioned that using an ability will summon your ship into the field, which we can assume is going to drop off our summons. And you can already see some of this tech being used in Ash and Iron with the reclaim activity. Now, similar to Edge and Fate, my guess is that these new abilities will only be available to be used in the Lawless Frontier, which is a bit of a downer, but what I'm really hoping for is that Bungie really leans heavily into this. For instance, right now in the reclaim activity, you can unlock the brig, which you would think would be extremely powerful, but it's actually not. If Bungie really wants to go in this direction of like Helldivers for this expansion, you gotta make those stratagems, or in this case, these abilities, very strong. Now, Bungie did mention that none of these abilities will override your subclass abilities. They are in addition to what we already have. So it's really interesting to see this approach, guys. If you look at like Edge of Fate, Metrovania genre was like the big inspiration for that. And then you got Renegades, which is of course Star Wars themed, but also heavily influenced, at least in my opinion, by Helldivers. And for good reason. Helldivers pops off. But again, I hope Bungie really leans into the lethality here of these abilities. Make them potent, Bungie. Now, throughout the Vidoc, we get a look at some of the new weapons arriving in Renegades. Later in the stream, Robbie clarified that these new blasters will pull ammo straight from reserves, and they'll be using a heat system, where instead of a normal reload, you have to vent the weapon before shooting to keep it from overheating. Now, to be quite honest, we've already have something like this in the game currently. Third iteration is essentially that, but it sounds like they're even going to ditch the magazine altogether and just rely on the heat management system to replace our magazine. Now, as far as the actual weapons that we saw, there's the classic Han Solo blaster. It's a legendary weapon that supposedly feels like Forerunner at home. It has a scope for long-range combat, but hipfire that also suits running and gunning. We saw a Strand pulse rifle throughout the Vidoc, taking an inspiration from the EE3 carbine. There's even one point where after a kill, we see what appears to be a red hologram effect, which my guess is a custom kill effect that we're going to receive for our tier 5 weapons next expansion. Now, there's a stasis auto rifle that seems to take inspiration from the EL-16 HFE. Keep in mind, guys, I'm not a Star Wars expert, so perhaps there's another weapon that this is based off of. Whatever the case, though, it looks to be firing as a rapid fire frame. Now, there's another weapon in the key art that we didn't see used in the Vidoc, but it's based off of the phase pulse blaster often seen used in the Mandalorian. Now, the weapon we're most excited about, though, is our lightsabers, or as Bungie is calling it, the Praxic Blade. Per Robbie, it's going to be highly customizable in gameplay and visuals, and there's going to be lots of parts and components that we're going to be chasing and discovering throughout the Lawless Frontier, including the dungeon. So don't expect to be given this weapon right out the gate. You're going to need to earn it. And depending on how in-depth the customization gets, who knows, we may be grinding for that perfect Praxic Blade for quite some time. 100% though, we will be able to customize the color. But the other questions we have, can we customize the hilt pieces? And I would assume the perks as well. Now, it looks like this is going to be an exotic weapon. And Robbie even double confirmed this by saying it truly feels exotic. There are things you can do with it no other weapon can do. And to be quite honest, yeah, I mean, looking at the gameplay, you can see it reflect incoming bullets back at enemies. You can even throw the blade and it'll come back to you. Even the attacks have very unique lunge animations that are completely different than our other swords currently in game. Now, is it possible part of the gameplay customization is different fighting styles and stances? It's probably a bit of a reach. I think it's still going to be very much us using a sword, which is what we've been doing for years. It's just going to be a lightsaber that you can reflect things and can also throw. Either way though, guys, it looks to be a very unique weapon, as it should be. It's a lightsaber. Now, this takes us to the story portion of what was disclosed to us. This one is about to get lore heavy. After the events of Edge of Fate, drifters start seeing and spouting some crazy stories. The Baron Imperium has grown at an alarming rate and established themselves as the top dogs of the criminal underworld. We're operating in defiance of the Vanguard's orders, but we may have a potential ally. A member of the Praxic Order will be joining our crew in Renegades, and we actually see her get into a lightsaber duel with a dark hooded figure that we're going to talk about in just a moment. But despite the fact she goes unnamed, we have enough information to guess who this mysterious character is. The Praxic Order is an organization of warlocks intent on keeping artifacts of the darkness out of Guardian hands. And given the history of Thorn and Dredgen Yor, they are staunchly opposed to any potential corruption that may lead Guardians away from the light. And this includes the Gambit activity. One of the members of the Praxic Order, Honor Mahal, which I'm probably killing that name, has a history with the Drifter. She was vehemently opposed to him residing in the tower and kept tabs on him in case he had any connections with the shadows of Yor. It is this Honor, I believe, who we see in the Vidoc. At some point, Drifter is captured aboard an enemy vessel that we also see chasing his ship during the Vidoc. He's then imprisoned in stasis inside of this glass dome room. Classic! Now, we know at some point we try to rescue him since we see our Guardians walking through the hallways of said ship. And in the teaser from Edge of Fate, because of the glass roof, you can tell it is the same room behind the Guardians as we face some unknown threat. Now, since the entire point of the campaign is to save Drifter, we'll probably fail to free him at the start of the campaign, and then with the help of Honor, we'll escape this dark figure and begin our job hunt with the criminal world. So we have the help we need to attempt a rescue for Drifter once more. Now, the question still remains, who is this mysterious character? Robbie mentioned that Honor is tasked with investigating reports of Dredgen activity. To clarify, Dredgen are corrupted Guardians. In-game, the Renegades description mentions there is a new Dredgen in Seoul, and on Bungie's website, he's even named as Dredgen Bell. So obviously a new character we've never seen before, but I do want to explore some theories surrounding this character given his presence in the key art. We see him holding a ghost in his hand, which could be his own, or it could be someone else's. Now, we know based off history of Dredgen Yor that ghosts aren't too fond of the Guardians becoming corrupted. Vincent, Yor's ghost, is actually still alive, but will not revive Yor because of how evil he was. It's possible that Bell here is also pulling his ghost along? Or what if this ghost is Vincent? What if Bell is trying to force Vincent to revive Yor? Or better yet, what if Bell is Yor? I know it's far-fetched, but if the 9 are involved, who knows? They pull Lodi through time. Who's to say they can't do the same with Yor? And what better way to end off the campaign than to reenact another legendary duel with the legendary Dredgen? If you have no idea what I'm referring to, Vive has an entire video that is voice acted and everything explaining the fall of this magnificent character and the duel he had with Shin Malfur. This is the history behind several weapons in Destiny: Rose, Last Word, Thorn. And speaking of, we actually see Drifter holding Thorn in one of the Vidoc cinematics. Even more reason to believe Yor may at the very least be relevant to the story. There's already a lot to balance narratively between the 9, the Praxic Order, Dredgen, Drifter, Syndicates, the Imperium, and the totally not Death Star super weapon that they are supposedly making. Hopefully, Yor fits in somewhere. Now, another villain we see is some sort of Imperium leader who also is featured in the key art. He's got tubes all over his body, emanating from a chest plate, so Bungie was probably looking to capture some of that Darth Vader essence with this design. Now, the campaign will have dedicated story missions alongside the jobs that we'll be taking on in the Frontier. And after completing the campaign and toppling the Imperium, this will then begin the turf war between the 3 syndicates as they vie for power over that frontier. We're shown this view of Mars, and we'll be able to pledge ourselves to a syndicate and then target other syndicates to fight over contested territory, unlock more abilities, upgrades, bonuses, and weekly shipments. The question is whether the contested territories in-game are simulated or actually influenced by the players. For instance, if I choose Pikers and I grind harder than you, will my syndicate win over your territory and get more rewards? Honestly, that would be great, but I don't think they're going to go that in depth. I wish. And I felt like for the longest time when we imagined what factions would be like if it ever returned to Destiny, this was kind of my thought. I love the idea of committing to a single faction and then taking over territories that other factions have. Now, this takes us to quality of life. As we know, Bungie is in an experimental phase of development for Destiny, and one of the big goals of each expansion is to push quality of life updates. Granted, it feels like every time we turn around, something is breaking in this game. We've talked about this in great depth, from Bungie's plan to make the power climb more rewarding, better in-game loot tiers, etc. Many of these updates are arriving in Ash and Iron, or at least getting fixed. But looking at Renegades specifically, we're going to be getting a new system called Vanguard Orders, which will offer daily and weekly objectives that we can target to earn meaningful rewards each week, to then earn legendary or exotic tier rewards depending on the challenge difficulty. Now, weekly conquest rewards and legacy raids and dungeons will be added to the portal. However, this will still be limited to portal gear, but Bungie has heard the feedback that we want reprised gear from our raid contents. As it turns out, the process of updating gear from the old loot system to tier loot system isn't as simple as flipping a switch. And I've always said it for the longest time, guys, that's the biggest limiting factor, is having enough bandwidth to add all those armors back in the game with the armor set bonuses that are actually good and well thought out, on top of everything being tiered loot. Now, looking at the upcoming changes to build crafting, all exotic weapons and armor will now be featured gear once Renegade launches. I wish it could happen sooner, guys, but at least it's coming. No more restrictive build crafting simply because your exotic isn't on a special curated list. In Shadow and Order, the major update after Renegades, will be able to enhance our legendary gear all the way up from tier 1 to tier 5, which is great. If you get a god roll that's tier 1, keep it, as you'll have the opportunity to fully upgrade it. Now, they did mention we're also getting an update to our vault sorting and filtering. They also mentioned space. Bungie didn't really clarify much outside of that, and I will say, guys, they danced around the vault topic a lot, which means I wouldn't be surprised if they just roll out 100 more slots, which, let me just say, at this point in Destiny's life is not enough. We need a permanent solution to vault. This is just simply kicking the can down the road. And with every new armor set that comes out, with all the different variety of stat distributions, with all the different tiered loot that's also coming, nothing stops me playing this game more than not having space to store all of this stuff. Now, some other things they mentioned is that featured gear will no longer contribute to activity scoring. Non-critical nerfs will be deprioritized in favor of more important balance changes unless it threatens the day one in-game content. For instance, like Desert Perpetual or the new dungeon. And forgotten supers like Ward of Dawn and Golden Gun are going to get some love here soon. It was really interesting to hear how they're going to be rolling back pretty much a multitude of the nerfs that came out with Ash and Iron, most notably Stronghold. We'll see how this shakes out. It's not that I don't believe that sandbox changes aren't important. I think mixing the sandbox up is incredibly important. For instance, the reworks here recently were Sturm and Hawkmoon now work with Lucky Pants. That's incredible. And it seems like they're going to be leaning more into the buff side of things rather than just nerfing things just for the sake of nerfing them. But that's it, guys. That is your entire breakdown of yesterday's Renegade stream. Outside of that, Festival of the Lost is going to be returning to us. We're actually going to have an entirely new activity dedicated dedicated to Festival. And yes, they're bringing some very drippy armor. This is armor you guys voted on, and I gotta say, man, some of the best looking armor I've ever seen. So for the first time in a very, very long time, I'm actually looking forward to the Halloween event inside of Destiny. And if any of my folks here have an MMO background outside of Destiny, you know, holiday events, man, they're important, dude. I never missed one inside of RuneScape. So that's it, guys. Let me know in the comments below if we missed anything. And I also want to hear your thoughts on what you saw in this live stream. Fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching. And as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.